the news.
A young boy is now known to be the only person to have survived a plane crash that killed 103 people in Libya. The accident happened when the jet owned by Libya's Afriqiya airline was coming in to land at Tripoli airport from Johannesburg in South Africa. 93 passengers and 11 crew were on board the Airbus. The cause of the crash is still unknown, although terrorism has been ruled out. Officials say the plane exploded on landing and totally disintegrated. The images would certainly confirm that breakup, and the jet's flight recorder is expected to provide vital clues. Plane maker Airbus has said the jet was an A330. It's helping authorities with their investigation. 22 Libyans are said to be among the dead, as well as dozens of Dutch nationals. It's feared other nationalities, including Britons and South Africans, may also have been on board. The sole survivor of flight 8U771 from Johannesburg to Tripoli. For the moment, little is known about the boy, other than the fact that he's thought to be Dutch and between 8 and 10 years old. He's currently undergoing treatment in the Libyan capital, Tripoli. What's remarkable is that none of his injuries are life-threatening. He's the only victim of the crash to have reached hospital, this doctor said. He has several fractures, legs broken in several places. He's in a stable condition and isn't in danger. Earlier, the Dutch Prime Minister held an emergency press conference to express his condolences to the families of those killed. More than 60 nationals from the Netherlands are estimated to be among the dead. It's thought many of the passengers were bound for various European destinations, including London, Paris and Brussels. Spain has confirmed a series of strict austerity measures aimed at tackling its ballooning deficit. Socialist Prime Minister José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero unveiled the plan in front of Parliament, with civil servants set to bear the brunt of the harsh cuts. The Spanish government is coming under immense pressure from Brussels and as far afield as Washington to do something quick, with fears it could suffer the same fate as Greece. In Athens, more protests against the tough government plan to control its debt. Scenes Madrid will hope it'll be able to avoid. Greek trade unions have also promised another 24-hour nationwide strike later this month. Despite the Greek crisis, some other European countries remain keen on joining the 16-nation single currency. Estonia has just been given a clean bill of health to start using the euro next year. Euronews has more on the crisis facing Europe's heavily indebted economies coming up.
They're calling it a new politics. Conservative Prime Minister David Cameron and Liberal Democrat Nick Clegg have set out how they'll work together in Britain's first coalition government since the Second World War. Their alliance arose from an inconclusive election, but they believe it will be strong enough to survive a full 5-year term.
I want this to be a bold, reforming government that puts fairness back into Britain. A government that restores our faith in what a healthy, strong society can achieve. A government that takes power away from politicians, as David said, and gives it back to you.
But what about old rivalries?
Prime Minister, do you now regret when once asked what your favourite joke was, you replied, Nick Clegg? And Deputy Prime Minister, what do you think of that?
We're all going to have... I'm afraid I did once. Right. We're all... I'm back! We're all going to have things that we said thrown back at us. And you know, there's a serious point in this, which is if you want to spend the next 5 years finding Lib Dem politicians who slightly disagree with Conservative politicians about this or a slightly nuanced policy, you can find lots. But we're looking at the bigger picture. We're looking at what a bold move like this with a strong, stable government can achieve.
Yet as the pair set off on their journey together, journalists in the Downing Street garden could be forgiven for wondering, will this be a walk in the park or a roller coaster ride?
It's a handshake that marks a historic day for Britain and the start of a honeymoon in an unlikely political marriage. Conservative Prime Minister David Cameron has agreed with his Liberal Democrat Deputy Nick Clegg to share the power of running the country between both parties. You would have to go back 7 decades for the last example of a British coalition government. It was formed in 1940 by wartime Premier Winston Churchill and included Conservatives, Liberals and Labour politicians. The Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats were locked in intensive negotiations following Thursday's inconclusive election results. The Tories have had to make a number of policy sacrifices in order to get the Liberal Democrats on side. The Lib Dems now accept Tory plans to cut £6 billion from public spending this year. They've also ditched their support for an amnesty for illegal immigrants and have agreed that any future transfer of power to the EU must be put to a referendum. They've also softened their position on joining the euro. The Conservatives have also backtracked in key areas. Brits won't pay any tax on the first £10,000 they earn in a year, and there'll be a referendum on reforming Britain's voting system. Jobs have also been dished out to win Lib Dem support. While Conservative George Osborne becomes Britain's finance minister, Liberal Democrat Vince Cable becomes the new business secretary.
I think we both realise that there's a massive task facing the country and we've got to work together on it.
Also joining the Cameron cabinet is one-time party leader William Hague as Foreign Secretary. Theresa May, meanwhile, becomes only the second woman to hold the position of Home Secretary. Liberal Democrat leader Nick Clegg becomes Deputy Prime Minister, while Chris Huhne is named Energy and Climate Secretary. Although from different sides of the political spectrum, the Liberal Democrats say they'll support the Conservatives on key areas, such as defence, the economy and foreign affairs.
Differences over the UK's role in relation to Europe made it awkward for Britain's new political heads to pull together a political compromise.
One of the things I would do if I was your Prime Minister is straight away pass a law through Parliament that says if ever there's a future occasion when laws are being proposed to pass power from Westminster to Brussels, there would be a guarantee of a referendum held in our country.
How on earth does it help anyone in Bristol or anyone else in the country for that matter, David Cameron, to join together in the European Union with a bunch of nutters, anti-Semites, people who deny climate change exists, homophobes? That doesn't help Britain. Of course we need to change the European Union, but you change clubs of which you are a member by getting stuck in, not standing on the sidelines and complaining about things.
After the verbal electoral fisticuffs, what place in the Conservatives and Lib Dems political briefcase is there for Europe?
We know that European issues are the ones which are more divisive, potentially. The two parties have conflicting views. So they will probably try to push them to a side to focus on some of the other important business that they have on the plate, like reducing the deficit, dealing with tax reform, dealing with banking reform and so on. In the policy document that they have just produced, European Union only comes in 9th in the list of priorities.
A Labour Party member in the European Parliament shares a thought for what effect deferred matters might have eventually.
Just before the coalition was formed, William Hague, the new Foreign Secretary, wrote a memo to the new Prime Minister David Cameron, laying out how Eurosceptic they were going to be and how they were going to give the EU a hard time and how they wish to repatriate some legislation, including social legislation. And I just wonder how the Lib Dems are going to react to that.
The new Foreign Secretary, William Hague, has downplayed concern for the UK's workings with the EU, and he said it wasn't hard for the Conservatives and Lib Dems to agree not to transfer any further sovereignty to Europe.
US President Barack Obama and his Afghan counterpart Hamid Karzai put on a united front after some difficult discussions in Washington on Wednesday. The pair have had a very public falling out in recent months, but insist their shared goals are stronger than their disagreements.
There are days that we are happy, there are days that we are not happy. It's a mutual relationship towards a common objective. And definitely days have come in which we've had difference of opinion, and definitely days in the future will come in which we have difference of opinion.
question, and then President Obama.
US fears of corruption within Afghanistan's government have been an ongoing source of tension.
President Karzai committed to making good governance a top priority, and I want to acknowledge the progress that has been made, including strengthening anti-corruption efforts, improving governance at provincial and district levels, and progress towards credible parliamentary elections later this year. Of course, President Karzai and I both acknowledge that much more work needs to be done.
As Obama justifies the US's continued involvement in the conflict to a war-weary domestic audience, Karzai sought reassurances that the US wouldn't abandon the Afghan people.